And you tune to Risky Business. I'm your host, Bryan Hattingh. And with me in the studio, first of all, welcome my team, which is John O'Shaw, sort of co-host and sound engineer, and his very esteemed young assistant, Anthony. Welcome, both of you.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having us back on another show. Well, I don't get a choice, do I, Bryan?
No, you don't. No, you don't. Not at all. But more importantly, our guest today in the studio is none other than Michael Franklin, who I know through various avenues and channels. It's ironic how we've come to discover how there are many people that we know from different parts of our lives. But more importantly, I'm wanting to talk to him today as a international business leader who's worked on various continents, in various countries, in significant businesses, and just to talk around the whole world of leadership. But first of all, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. And Michael, just to start out, I think what would be good is if you could give the listeners just a sort of high level of what your journey through the world of work and business, how it traveled and where it came from and where it went.
Okay, sure. So actually, I left South Africa in the 80s, about 82, to go to the US to set up a subsidiary of a German multinational that I was basically a director of here in South Africa in the plastics business. And so that journey took me to Chicago in 82. Basically, it was kind of a bigger canvas to paint on, as opposed to a immigrant, can put it that way. I've never lost my connections and ties to South Africa and Cape Town specifically, but I figured out that the wide world was fascinating for me, and I wanted to go and see what we could do. So anyway, bottom line is, ended up in Chicago in the minus 25-degree day, and with about $2,000 in my pocket, and started to set up this business with not much financial support. And about less than a year later, the German parent company decided not to invest in the States and to focus on Asia and Europe and South Africa, and basically said, well, you started it, you can have it. So for $1, I acquired the business, or such as it was.
How's that? Yes.
And so then I built that business for several, for many years. This is basically in plastics and plastics packaging, and then I got into the pharmaceutical side of packaging and drug delivery systems. So I'm going to give you a 30,000-foot version of this.
Yes, yeah, sure.
And then about 10 years later, or 12 years later, I sold it to an American company that was interested in my international reach from the States, and the fact that I could speak German and Spanish and so on. So I sold it to them, and they asked me to stay on for a year as VP for international, and I was kind of reluctant to do that, having worked for myself for a long time. But they gave me a lot of freedom, and I found that it was really amazing to have somebody pay all my bills, had unlimited resources at my disposal, accountants, lawyers, everything, and I could get paid first and not last, and small things like that. So that was kind of refreshing. And then I had so much autonomy in this thing. I thought, well, after a year, what am I going to do? I'm enjoying this, so I signed on, and I stayed with that company for 16 years actually. And
still based in Chicago, Michael?
Then I moved down to Princeton because this company is really focused on the pharmaceutical business. So I moved to Princeton with my family in New Jersey. And then the company was on a big expansion push and was all international. So we bought a public company that had European operations in Belgium and Italy, and set up our operations in Latin America and Argentina and Buenos Aires, set up our operations in China, in Shanghai, and in Hong Kong, and was running the international and the US pharmaceuticals business. So it was kind of a 15, 16 years of all the stars in alignment. So over the course of that period, I developed what I could think of as real understanding of international business, different leadership styles. We set up operations in India as well, which was a challenge in and of itself. So over the span of those 25, 30 years of my own business and the US business, really got into the weeds with startups and turnarounds in Latin America, Asia Pacific, Europe, understanding different cultures, understanding different management styles, understanding what makes people tick, what works, what doesn't work. And then that dream job came to an end when we were bought by private equity in 2009, and I did that for a year, and I would not recommend a private equity environment for anybody who's used to some autonomy. And that lasted about a year, and then I was hired by an Indian multinational that had many different operating divisions, and nobody put them all together and give it a brand identity and created one cohesive unit out of that. And so I kept my apartment in Shanghai, and I moved to Mumbai 2 weeks a month because I didn't want to become an Indian tax resident or whatever. I was a contract CEO for this business for the last 4 years of my formal working life. And running a big Indian company was a challenge, probably the biggest challenge I've ever had in my corporate life. But it worked very well, and changed a lot of attitudes and changed a lot of concepts about accountability and personal responsibilities, and really transformed the business with acquisition in Croatia, consolidating operations in the United States, building a business in Brazil, and back in China, another operation in the Shanghai area. So I retired formally from what my son or my kids call big boy jobs about 12 years ago. And I've been doing advisory, not consulting, advisory ever since, and some board of directors stuff, mainly doing entrees into Asia Pacific, from Europe, US, mainly, and based in Bangkok, sort of moved between Bangkok and Hout Bay. Those are my two bases, and been doing very interesting projects for Korean companies, Irish company, American company, German business, a Swiss pharma company that I've been doing for years and years and years now, an advisory role. So my retirement has been as much fun or more, with these kind of projects, long-term projects, shorter-term projects. Some things that were scheduled for 6 months went on for 8 years, things like that. So it's kind of given me a kind of rounded perspective on a lot of things, different cultures. I think one key to this is I'm not that good at maths. I know how to read a balance sheet and a P&L, but my mind is very tuned to languages. So I've been able to work very effectively in Spanish and German, French, Chinese quite well, and now Thai as well. I can speak Thai, having been in Thailand for 8 years. So that also creates a different perspective and a different depth of understanding, and I say much easier to build trust levels when you can talk to somebody in his own language, his or her own language.
Absolutely.
So it's been a very interesting and fulfilling journey. I think it's characterized by being able to do new things and then create things and then move on. I'm not the guy to mow the lawn and trim the hedge. I mean, once a business is established and up and running, I've always made myself redundant and put people in to run it and then move on to the next challenge. In fact, in the years of mentoring young young high performers, I've always told them, I'm going to give you one tip: make yourself redundant as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And so you can go to your boss or the chairman or the board and say, I've done this. Here's my successor. I want to give me a new challenge. Give me a bigger canvas to paint on. And then if you're in the right organization, that'll happen. And if you don't, then you'll know it's time to move on. So that's probably the 30,000 foot, 7.57 minute, 30-second thumbnail of where my journey's taken me.
That's a wonderful story, Michael. Thank you. And tremendously exciting and wonderfully colorful, and with so many facets to it that each of them bring their own degree of challenge and interest. Even just that acquisitive growth model, M&A has been such a fraught sector in terms of its failure rates, that on the one hand, if you get it right and you do it right, it can bring about a whole lot of benefit and wealth and growth for many people. But if you do it wrong, which many companies do, they don't get it right.
Right.
Tell me something in your experience then in working across these divides. Did you find a common thread in terms of leadership style and leadership approaches, or did you find that you had to bespoke them into the different regions you went into?
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question. So we used to, I think, in quote unquote Western societies, or particularly American business, English to a large extent, was mainly Western cultures of things being fairly black and white, right?
Yes.
It's right or it's wrong. It's not very nuanced in a lot of ways, but there's compliance and there's non-compliance. There's corruption and there's zero tolerance. Those kind of things. So what I found was that in transiting to other parts of the world where these things are not so black and white, there's a whole spectrum of gray, right? Because if you transition from black to white, you go through multiple shades of gray. So what I found most challenging and most interesting, and the common thread, was that working in societies and in business environments where people are used to working in gray, they love having a black and white environment stamped on them because it just makes everything easier. So I would say the common thread in all those things was to eliminate the shades of gray in terms of what's right and what's wrong. Of course, everything is nuanced, right? And but in terms of do the right thing and comply, don't everything that you should do, you do should be able to be printed, and you'd be proud of it if it's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And the other thing that I found that is a common thread is that people respond very well to trust.
Yeah.
A lot of these societies that we're talking about, specifically Asian societies, are very, very, let's say, very low trust level.
Yeah.
And so everything is like monitored, checked, verified, double checked. Is this person lying to me? And so on and so on. So it's kind of refreshing when you say, I've got a black and white situation here. This is right. This is wrong. And guess what? I trust you. Don't let me down.
That's fantastic. And in fact, we do a lot of work with that, with executive teams today across very diverse industries, where we invariably end up coming back to the foundational element of trust, in trying to build effective leadership teams. If you look at the flip side of it, the 5 dysfunctions of a team start with the foundation of trust. If the trust is not there, you've got no basis for constructive conflict, or for collaboration, or for building a common ecosystem. And that's so essential in doing that, and in that process, there's that willingness to be vulnerable. And in order to be vulnerable, there needs to be an elevated level of self-awareness. And it's remarkable to find how many leaders and senior leaders in business are just not self-aware. and how that's such an important process to take them through.
Absolutely. The interesting part about this trust thing is that people really respond to that much more than people who than operating in an environment where their motives aren't trusted. People don't believe them instinctively.
Yes.
And I must say that in all my years, the people that I've got on board with this have never, excuse me, not one has ever let me down.
Isn't that amazing? Huh? I think it speaks to a whole thing of self-worth, that when people are trusted, they feel that they're worthwhile. They feel that they've actually got status, and that they're encouraged in and through that to live up to this perceived expectation of what's a positive expectation of what's placed on them.
That's exactly that. You just said exactly, described exactly what it is.
Wonderful.
And,
So, yeah.
Also, when we were doing hiring processes, when I was hiring senior managers or people running countries or regions or whatever, my final thing was, before I left them on their own to go do their work, is I don't want you to be in my 3 a.m. conversation with myself. And like, what? What does that mean?
Exactly.
So what I mean is, if I get up at 3 a.m., it's only for one reason. I need to have a little bathroom break and go right back to sleep. I don't want to be worrying about what you're doing.
Exactly. Thank you. You tuned to Risky Business, the good news business talk show, the heart of business, the soul of rock and roll. I'm your host, Bryan Hattingh. With me in the studio today, Michael Franklin, and he's sharing his story and views and perspectives on a deeply built and developed view and perspective with helicopter windows and views of the world of work, of people across geographies, across industries, and across demographics. And it's wonderful to see how that plays out in leadership style. So here we go. I'm your host, Bryan Hattingh, the show, Risky Business, and with me, Michael Franklin. Michael, yes. So in those times, did you do a lot of M&A work? I mean, was a lot of the growth acquisitive?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. It was a combination of M&A work. So this is interesting. If we zoom out, if you look at international expansion or any kind of expansion, you always start with two things: what the Americans call seed or sod.
Yeah.
Right? Do you buy a tree, a little tree, or do you plant a tree?
Yes.
Right. So I used to teach a course at a business school in New Jersey called it was part of the international program, MBA, executive MBA program called Creeping Incrementalism.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Yeah.
Creeping incrementalism. Like how do you start? How do you sell outside your country or your geography?
Yes.
Because there's only a few ways to increase your sales. You sell more things to your existing customers. You get new customers within your sales area, if you want to call it that, or you sell in different geographies, apart from taking away market share from your competitors, right? So this kind of focused down on creeping incrementalism. So I taught this course to aspiring international entrepreneurs. Right? What do? You do some research. Of course, these things are much easier these days with the internet. Like, is this a market for you? Is your product going to work there? Who are the competitors? Go to find out the trade show. Go and set up a little booth in a trade show in Sao Paulo or Shanghai or Bombay, and gauge interest. Talk to people who may like to represent you. Find out who would work for you, work well with you, who you could, do the feet on the ground, the research that you need to build your business case, and so on and so on. And then work through an agent, and then later, when the business matures, set up your own office to do the work of the agent. Obviously, you have to exit that relationship and pay them for their work and whatever's been done. And then, do you manufacture there? Do you import? from
Yeah.
your home country. So this concept of creeping incrementalism, right? So that's the seed part. The other part was, I've been in many markets where we've just looked at companies and said, this one is a good, what we call bolt-on. We can buy this business, this gets us right into this market right away. And typically you'd pay a premium for that because it's a market entry and it's a strategic piece. And then the third one is, in my time, we've acquired some public companies, and then you just get a whole basket full of companies, and then you decide what you want to keep and what's core and what's not core. So I've kind of gone the gamut from, merging public companies and sorting out what's core and what's not, to literal startups, ground up startups. And
so, Michael, what's interesting, if I look at the South African landscape, and I look at how South Africans have, like yourself, in fact, have traveled abroad and made huge successes, and that's varied from them doing it in their own capacities to people like a Graham Mackay, who took SAB and listed it on LSE and really made SAB become the giant that it is today. But there've also been a lot of sad stories of significant companies that went abroad believing that they could rock and roll and do it, and in fact finding out that they didn't. And one of the things that I noticed in one or two instances was the company's success in the local market was a result of a very cohesive collective of execs and leaders in the business who had great connectivity into the South African market and business sectors. But when they went abroad, they had to then move these guys individually into different regions. And that cohesion as that executive team was one of the things I think that challenged them, because they were now spread far and wide and it's rather thin. And that sort of success formula was no longer so prominent. And they had to then deal with the rigors and vigors of first world business, and in many instances didn't succeed, and not realizing that markets are considerably different. Doing business in England is in many ways similar to South Africa. Doing business in the States, which you'd know firsthand, is very different.
Right. You've hit on something that I could write a book about, because I've seen this so much. I mean, I can talk about some South African companies. So like Woolworths would be one, with their David Jones acquisition in Australia.
Yeah.
For example, I've seen many. Typically, what will happen is you'll get an acquisition like this, and the guys will say, "We know how to run this business. We're good. We're hot stuff," and then put their own managers in, or their own culture and thing, and just wreck it. And then sit back and wonder why. So that's why I'm kind of like focused on this creeping incrementalism thing. So each step makes sense, and you consolidate before you move to the next step, because you're on sure ground. And I've seen many businesses in my growth years in China, which was a fantastic experience from like 2004 to 2013.
Yeah.
When I lived in Shanghai, there were so many people like me, that were, people from big companies with checkbooks writing the business, and you could see how the ones that succeeded, and the ones that failed didn't. And especially German companies were terrible about setting up companies and putting in German managers and German management styles and controlling everything from Bremen or Hamburg or Frankfurt, and wondered why they failed and lost huge amounts of money. So that's a very, very interesting and valid point, and which is why the adaptation and hiring the right local people, and then again, this comes full circle, and then empowering them and trusting them is really the only way to succeed in that business. You've touched on the core of it. Actually, that's what it's all about.
Michael, I'd like to just chime in here with a bit of a question. So then, and I suppose this just comes back to your history a little bit. And you said you went from Cape Town to the US, for example. Why did your company choose you? What did they see in you, or how did that work? And why do you think that went down? And how were you able to then bridge the gap, so to speak?
Well, I think that's a good question. So now you're going to ask me to critique myself. So,
Oops.
I think the only answer is I did a couple of business trips to the US, and on one of those trips, I met a guy called Jack Welch, who he was head of GE Plastics at the time.
Mm.
And I met him at Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and he was in the office that day quite by chance, and I was meeting with the export director for South Africa, a guy called Tom Hayes, and he said, "Oh, Jack's in the office. I'd like you to meet him." So I said, "Sure." This was before he became. I'm aging.
Jack.
I'm dating myself now, right? So anyway, long story short, I got the GE Lexan distribution for South Africa for our company here.
Wow.
And, at that time, it was called Crystallite Marketing. And my boss, and there was another big one we got called Westlake Plastics. And my boss was kind of impressed that I was able to do this. It's what we wanted. And then the whole idea was like, we got that coming this way. What can we do? That's a huge, because I was very enthusiastic about the US market. You know, in those days, it was like really opportunities were boundless. And I said, let's go and set up there. And so my enthusiasm got met with a yes. So be careful for what you wish for.
It's interesting that you drove this thing so much, but then they decided to pull out of the US market. It's interesting.
Yeah, so what happened was the chairman basically was getting old. He was a German guy. He was a German multinational. And his daughter and son-in-law, who took over the business, didn't want to participate in the US market for their own reasons. And that was it.
Wow.
That's so interesting. Sure. And just going back on that whole thing of your incremental, just repeat it again for me. I loved it. Creeping incrementalism. I love that. Don't you find often in situations, particularly when it's helter-skelter and you're running forward, and particularly if things are successful, ironically, success can often be a causative factor in people failing. But is that...
It's a bad teacher.
Yeah, is that often people don't look at the trade-offs of doing something. They don't weigh it up and say, what am I trading off here? What am I not getting by doing this? What am I getting by doing it? And what do I get by not doing it? Or conversely, what do I get by not doing it? And because it all just seems so obvious, you know, this is all looking good. I mean, you've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it many times in the M&A story. You know, the guys get so excited about, you know, the shared vision, the synergies, all those.
How much money we're going to make? How much money we're going to
exactly the increased HEPs and EPs, and they don't look at the culture, and they don't look at the leadership, and they don't, you know, ask really important questions around the whys and you know what those nuances are. You know, it's a crazy thing.
Actually, I've seen some of the most amazing opportunities, and we bought some public companies and some bits of the business that weren't core.
Yeah.
Basically, the board had no patience for this. Just get rid of them, and people could buy incredible little businesses that weren't core, and just for like, just like, please take them. You know, like a garage sale. We got this old couch. Please take it away.
and happily did so with great results, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I've often said if I had to run my career again, I'd be an ambulance chaser of looking at mergers and then following which bits they wanted to divest.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. You're tuned to Risky Business with me in the studio, Michael Franklin, and we're talking about the world of acquisition, leadership, growth, discovery, and just actually taking a chance. You know, if you don't stick your head out like a tortoise, you won't go anywhere. And did you find that at what points in that journey, Mike, did you think, wow, is this going to work? You know, am I doing the right thing? You know, should I really? Or did you just go from strength to strength?
Fortunately, unfortunately, self-doubt has never been a thing that's burdened me.
Good.
And I had a kind of a classic upbringing, Catholic boarding school and officer school in the South African Army and so on. So I got a certain amount of discipline and resolve from those experiences. And I think one of the things that South Africans exhibit generally, and you talked about this earlier, was this resilience and this determination to make things happen.
Yeah.
And one of the things that when I first went to the States, it was literally a minus 25-degree day in Chicago. I was woefully underdressed, but there's no safety net. I didn't know anybody.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So you had no backup. I had a few contacts, but no family, no social support, no real financial support. And you become very self-reliant very quickly because you have no option. You have to succeed.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent we see that every day in our life here in South Africa. You see the Malawians and Zimbabweans that have no safety net. They've got no backup. So that they have to work hard. They have to be honest. They have to function. Otherwise, they can't survive in this environment because it's not they're not swimming in their own pool. And failure is not a success. It's on a bus back to Zimbabwe or Blantyre. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's the same kind of thing. So whenever I see successful Zimbabweans or Namibians or Malawians, they've got more than the average bear in terms of resolve and discipline and just drive and strength, inner strength.
Richard Branson put it very beautifully. He said, true entrepreneurs never set out to make money. They set out to do something nobody's ever done before, do something better than anybody's done. And as a consequence of that, they make money. And so often in these type of things, it's around having that deep conviction of the merits and the value of what you're wanting to pursue. That extends beyond just it's a good idea or that sounds cool, because it's a good idea and that sounds cool doesn't carry you when it gets tough. What carries you when it gets tough is that conviction that I'm going to do this and I can do this, and I'm going to find a way, whatever it takes, within the bounds of the law, to make this work.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. And underlying this, which we haven't really talked about, is when you set out on these adventures, you also have to make a living and support a family and all that kind of stuff. So that part, I would say the middle part of life, that was really hard, with a young family and a wife and a house and all that stuff. It's what Scott Galloway calls when stuff gets real.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me, how did your family cope with the moves across geographies? And
my kids were born in America, so they're Americans, and I use that as a base. And they spent time in Latin America, but by the time I moved to Asia, they were already grown up.
Oh, really?
So
okay.
They're already into university and that kind of stuff. So that was an interesting time to actually start phase 2 of life and careers.
Absolutely. It's quite amazing. It timed itself. I mean, it sounds almost sort of fairy tale like the way that the timing of things worked out for you. I'm sure some of it was planned, but I mean, interesting to see how these how so often if you go after something with the right intent and with the right energy and what have you, you create things that happen for you, almost like sort of, getting into quantum physics and entanglement and all sorts of things. What causes these forces of the universe to somehow just work for you? It's interesting.
But during my career, when I was doing a lot of traveling overseas, I mean, I would nearly always be home for weekends. And so I made that kind of a discipline too, even though it was exhausting.
Yes.
But during school holidays and things like that, I'd take them to like Argentina or to Germany or London, and we'd rent it would be before Airbnb, but the equivalent for a month, while I'd be busy, working, doing my thing in this new market, and we'd expose the family to all the culture and everything. And so they ended up very deeply traveled and appreciative.
That's wonderful. Michael, what a wonderful story. And I can't believe it. We've run out of time. Come to the end of the show. thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'd love to have you back because there's still much more we can talk about. So I'll definitely be in touch to do that. I'm sure our listeners will feel the same way. And wishing you continued happiness, success, and fun with the advisory work you're doing. And wishing you well. And listeners, remember that if you're not with the ones you love your ones you're with, and take time to show and tell the ones you love how much you do, and take some time to take care of yourselves as well. Thank you so much. Have a great week. Jono, thank you so much. Anthony and Michael, thank you once again.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers.
Thanks, Bryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Till next time.